Hello everyone, I am Rob of the Lair of OmnusI, here once more for another RPGaDay question, or topic word. Today is the 25th of August. We're running out of August. Today's word is Calamity. Calamity is, of course, a word meaning some sort of great disaster, and usually it's something that is truly momentous. Not just, that's unfortunate, or a lot of people got hurt. Calamity usually means devastating disaster, something that's truly horrendous. And it's not by coincidence that I'm wearing the hat that I'm wearing, which is a Confederate soldier's hat. This is a hat I almost never will wear, because a lot of people put a lot of symbolism into anything reminding them of the Civil War, the Southern stance that was, had they won the war, would have been the perpetuation of slavery. And I can certainly appreciate that people don't like it, which is where I'm only using this as a talking point, because I certainly myself do not have any siding with that. But a lot of times, a lot of our role-playing games and games in general all hinge on calamity. It's something that we often like to have as a backdrop. Dragonlance's Kryn's Cataclysm was a calamity. It changed the face of the world. Hundreds of thousands of people died. The whole face of people's faith and just shattered. Even talking on things like video games. If you've ever played, say, any of the Final Fantasy games, almost all of them have some sort of a calamity that happens. Either there's this huge floating creature called Sin that devours entire cities, or Final Fantasy 15, your spoiler alert, there's a war that takes place for your country while you, the prince, are out enjoying basically a bachelor party, an extended bachelor party. So, calamities are oftentimes a backdrop. They're something that you don't directly participate in, they just kind of set the events in motion. And sometimes that's all you really need, honestly. You don't need to have a story that really dwells upon the calamity itself. As a matter of fact, most stories generally don't that have included one. If there's a calamity that's woven into a story, it's usually one that works up as you go. Classic example, the Lord of the Rings story. It starts out, there is no war, although Sauron is gaining power in measurable ways. That is hinted at through various points in the story. But it does not necessarily go into full-on war where thousands of people are going to die until a bit later. Hello, Magic. It's the kind of thing that there's a backdrop of menace, but the actual calamity doesn't take place until well into the story. And the characters in that particular story do take a direct hand in it. Those who are fighting in, for example, the Battle of Helm's Deep, that is an actual conflict and potentially a complete disaster. So the calamity is that the ring is active again and it spurs everybody into war. How the group deals with that becomes the touchstone of it. Aragorn rises up and becomes the king. There's a complete changing of the guard as the steward dies, and ultimately it all comes to a crescendo. Not in the war itself and all the devastation. It actually ends when the smallest of things, a ring gets thrown into the volcano. And Sauron is defeated that way rather than in a actual huge cataclysmic battle. And I think that actually is kind of telling. In that there are war epics, certainly, and there have been war epics in fantasy stories as well. But if you are dealing with a long war epic, I've always found that the everyman in that kind of a conflict is generally the point where you can really get the richest drama and things. Otherwise, you're just directing. But if you are the man on the field suffering through these slings and arrows and the horrors of war, that's the reason why something like MASH, the movie or the TV show, and eventually the movie, but the TV show primarily, resonated with people because it was normal people in a horrible situation, constantly having the horrors of war thrust on them, and how they reacted and dealt with that was compelling. It was comedy in places, but it was intense drama and pathos. And quite honestly, in a calamity situation, either it works well as a backdrop if you don't want to dwell in it. If you don't want characters who are going to be scarred, who are going to realistically have honest-to-goodness trauma about these events that are unfolding around them. That is the risk in telling some sort of a calamity story where they are actually interacting in the calamity. Some might say that any story that takes place in the Warhammer 40,000 storyline, there is only war, and everybody deals with conflict. That's not entirely true. You can tell some really interesting stories setting up against an expectation of violence and actually turning that on its ear for an adventure or two, especially I find in Dark Crusade, or not Dark Crusade. The one about the Inquisition. Dark Heresy, that's it. Dark Heresy. If the players are all expecting something terrible and it turns out to be something relatively innocent played up for laughs for a session, you can do that. I'm going to take this off because it does make me feel uncomfortable to wear this hat. If I didn't collect hats, I wouldn't have it. But quite honestly, in calamities, if you're properly addressing them, there should be a great deal of unpleasantness to them. People get hurt. People get killed. In a fantasy setting, it could be, souls are lost, and things are on a grand scale. Nations are razed to the ground. In a modern calamity setting, nuclear war is certainly one of those things that has been brought up in a variety of games. So it's easy to come up with calamity. We're very good at breaking ourselves, and fantasy just gives us more ways of doing it. Any number of magical calamities in various fantasy worlds, sometimes shaping the face of the entire world at a time. And how players either are transposed against that calamity and react to the fallout or the actual event without participating, certainly one approach. Going into the calamity and seeing how people on the front lines are dealing with it, that can be very compelling role-playing as well. Possibly disturbing for some people. It's a good idea to do a session 0 and poll your players on what they're interested in and what their tolerance level is before you go into something like that. But in Calamity, there's opportunity. Opportunity for great role-playing, drama, pathos, just a flood of emotions and elements that you can touch upon, which can be very cathartic. It's good sometimes to face some of those deeper fears that you don't experience on an everyday basis, and those raw emotions through the protective lens of an avatar in a fantasy game. But yeah, Calamity can be quite an opportunity if used correctly. And just like some calamities, when it's all over, the world is made a little bit better place as a result. That sometimes can be a good thing too. So, my take on this word for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. I always enjoy getting new subscribers. I'm very grateful for the ones who have signed up for me lately. It makes me feel really good knowing that there's an audience out there who enjoys what I've been putting out. And I hope to continue making more content for you, especially for the next few days, whenever I break out and crawl in front of the internet to make a video for you. Thank you, and farewell.